guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Polly. I'm going to do a little series of videos called Beyond the Bends, whereby I'm going to be talking about yoga, lifestyle, spirituality, philosophy, off the mat. We often get sort of like engulfed in the modern day yoga practice, which can often result in looking through Instagram or looking through Facebook and seeing all these elaborate or photoshopped or amazingly weird and wacky poses of yogis in the middle of the Himalayas looking all perfect and angelic, and it can be quite off-putting, right? Modern day yoga doesn't necessarily look like what it feels like inside. Sometimes it can look a little bit synthetic, and sometimes it can look like it's all about an outcome, and it is not. So these talks that I want to do, however raw and rugged they're going to be, you might have dead plants in the background. I love plants. I don't ever want them to die, but I do live in Portugal and it can get extremely dry here at times. So it sometimes happens. So I'm going to be in all different areas. You might see me in my backyard, you might see me in my bedroom, you might see me in the middle of the mountains. You won't see me in a photoshopped yoga pose. You might see me in some yoga poses, but often I'm just going to be chatting. Okay, so what I really wanted to start this off with was the core of the yoga practice. What's the core of the yoga practice? Why it's essential to start to bring that into practice, and why yoga isn't about an outcome, and it isn't about a final posture, and it isn't actually about a shape at all. And it definitely isn't about who can do what and how stretchy can we get. Okay, yoga in essence is, the core of the yoga practice is what I'm going to describe as ahimsa. And ahimsa basically means non-violence. And I really want to start to reiterate that these words and these things that we work with in yoga, these philosophies, these practices, these theories, these spiritual endeavors are actually the core of the yoga practice, and the shapes are just a tool to bring us to those spaces, to bring us to the core of the yoga practice. So ahimsa, I want to talk about this today because I think it's essential for anyone who's getting into yoga, or even those who are getting really sort of like engulfed with this modern day yoga practice where we have to go up and we show up in our little slinky jazz panther leggings and our matching outfits, and we're all yogi and that. Do you know what I mean? I just want to break that down, and that's all cool. I'm not against any of this stuff, and I'm totally into everybody doing yoga in the way that they want to do yoga, because yoga is all about being authentic eventually. It's about coming back to our true authentic nature, stripping back some of the layers that society's piled upon us, and coming back to our true authentic being. That's really what we're doing here. So everybody can do stuff the way that they want to do stuff, and there's no right or wrong. And you know, there's so much sort of shit going around on YouTube and everywhere that there's such like a right and wrong way of doing everything. And actually yoga is about developing intuition in many ways, and it's all about listening to your own inner guidance system and doing something that you think is serving your body, your mind at the time. Okay, and everybody suits different things, so there's no right or wrong to everything. It's all just about listening to yourself. You are your greatest teacher. Okay, so I'm going to talk about ahimsa. Not for long. I'm going to talk about ahimsa as an introduction to these little videos that I'm going to do. Now, ahimsa means non-violence, and non-violence is the absolute core of the yoga practice. It's so essential to come into your physical yoga practice, your ritual, your daily movement practice, or your breathwork practice, or your meditation, whatever it is you're doing. It's so essential to come into this practice with kindness towards yourself. That is the first thing you should be thinking when you come onto the yoga mat. So like, I want to tell you a really quick story. I was going to say quick little story, but they're the same thing. So I'm just going to say quick story about when I first got into yoga about 16, 17 years ago, something along those lines. I used to be like a really ashtangi girl. I used to love the physical practice. I used to push myself, force myself into all of these different poses, handstands and headstands and loads of strenuous mental backbends, and I loved the challenge and I loved the movement. I'm very much into movement and activity. So Ashtanga was really sort of like pushing my body in towards change and shift and moving forward and what I could do. And eventually I actually started to get quite a bit of injury, and I started to go into practice feeling like, sit bone injuries all the time, hamstring tears, all of this rubbish that I would never advise anybody to get. But then again, sometimes you've got to live and learn. You've got to move through stuff to be able to realise what isn't working. And sometimes that comes through experience. But I did used to come into the yoga practice and I just wanted to make the shapes. I wanted to get into the handstands. I wanted to, do all these fancy movements. And I really thought at the beginning of my yoga practice that was essentially what was making me a good yogi, what was making me feel accomplished and feel some sort of self-worth, if that's even the way to describe it. And we all know that's not the case. You only have to look at that and analyse that was definitely not the case. However, moving through that journey of wanting to be really, really strong in my positions, and really it was all about the physical activity. It was all about what I could do. Moving through that journey and getting those injuries and realising that wasn't actually satisfying me. And it was actually coming from the ego. It was very much about my mind wanting to do those things, my masculine energy maybe wanting to do those things, aims, goals, final outcomes, very masculine energy orientated, which I've got quite a high masculine energy going on in there. So it can be my tendency as a person to go down that route of like, go, push, force, goals, aims, outcomes. And eventually, in the end, it just got me injured and it made me go full circle. And so what I really wanted to talk about was when I was doing that style of practice, I wasn't coming to the mat with ahimsa as the core of the practice, ahimsa, non-violence. And this really is a strong teaching of yoga, non-violence. When I was coming to the mat, I was coming to the mat from a place of ego, from a place of what I can do, maybe even showing off around my other peers or the people that were in the class with me, or showing off to myself. I don't know what I was doing, but I was definitely showing off. I can definitely tell you I was showing off somewhere along the lines. My ego liked it. My ego wanted to do it. And the more I started doing it, the less kindness I was actually giving to myself. So I actually went down a path of yoga that was in reflection of that. It was actually doing the opposite of what yoga actually is. And yoga is about respecting yourself. Yoga is about understanding yourself. Yoga is about stopping the fluctuations of the mind, releasing the ego, coming back to the heart space, being kind to yourself, being kind to others, compassion. And none of those things were coming from a space of compassion. And it took me a long time in my practice over the years to really stop and think, am I coming into this yoga practice to impress other people? Am I coming into this yoga practice to have a final outcome and impress myself and achieve something? Or am I coming into this yoga practice to understand myself a little bit more, to break away some barriers that are holding me back from liking myself, and in essence spreading that light and spreading that kindness and that joy that I feel for myself to others in compassion and through my daily life. And I always started to feel that I had to ask myself that question at the beginning of a yoga practice. So I started to ask myself that question. Is how I'm thinking and feeling and moving in this yoga practice coming from a space of compassion and non-violence, ahimsa, or am I attacking is the word, this yoga practice through a space of actually beating myself up? Am I actually coming into this yoga space going, you're not good enough, you should be able to get into that pose by now, other people are going to think you're shit at yoga because you can't do that posture, and you should be able to by now because you've been practicing yoga for over 15 years. Am I beating myself up on the mat? Am I using the yoga mat as another way to go, you shit human, you're really a shit human? Is that what I'm doing on the mat? Because if I am, that is not the essence of the yoga practice. The yoga practice is not an outcome. It's not a yoga pose. It's not some swanky, angelic little position that you can do on the top of a mountain in a lovely, glorious sunset. That is not yoga. Outcomes aren't yoga. Just like life is not about an outcome, is it? It's about the journey, and that shifts and changes continuously. And it has its ups and downs. And sometimes it can get swept from underneath your feet. And sometimes we go negative, and sometimes we feel positive. And it's all about experience, and it's all about, accepting ourselves to be able to know that those negatives and positives are all one side of the same coin. And the same goes for the yoga practice. It's about the journey, and there's no outcome. A handstand isn't the outcome. A perfectly aligned position isn't the outcome, because all of our bodies are different, and sometimes we might need to have different modifications and different blocks that we're working with, and we might need to use a different breath because we've got different cycles as a woman, or we're pregnant, or we're menstruating, or we've got a shoulder injury. Or we've got 2 shoulder injuries, our hips aren't right. There's lots of stuff that goes on in the physical body, in the mind, in the spiritual and energetic body that stops us from doing everything in a certain way. So we need to start to look at yoga in that way, in that non-perfect way, a non-outcome way. We're not meant to be having an outcome in yoga. We're meant to be finding kindness and compassion, and that is all to do with the journey. So ahimsa in yoga is very much about, are you coming into your yoga practice from a place of compassion and kindness? And how can you start to reflect on that continuously as you are moving through your shapes or your breath work or your meditation or whatever your yoga practice is? How can you start to become very, very, very self-aware that you are actually moving down the path of kindness and the path of ahimsa, non-violence, instead of the path of should, shouldn't, perfect outcome, aim, goal, and actually beating yourself up on the mat. And you can start practicing this with a simple question. Every time you come into your postures, every time you come to the mat, you can ask yourself the question, am I practicing with kindness towards myself, or am I coming to the mat to beat myself up? Really think about those things. Think about it when you're moving through a pose. You might be in crow pose or something like that. You might be in a challenging arm balance, or trying to get into a challenging arm balance and falling down completely, banging your head, getting back up again, getting frustrated. Are you in that yoga pose thinking, I feel calm, content and happy with where I am? Or are you in that yoga pose thinking, I should be doing this and I should be doing that, and I really should be getting this balance by now? Think about, bring awareness into your practice and really stop, think, take the breath and ask yourself the question, Is this kind or is this unkind? Is this coming from my heart or is this coming from my head? The head likes to be unkind and it likes short-term fixes, which is get this yoga pose really quickly so I can look really good on Instagram. Or the heart will say, it's not about getting this yoga pose really quickly. It's about a long, sustainable practice of kindness and compassion daily, or however many times you want to do it in your week, to come back to the heart space and to get out of the head space. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Are you practicing yoga with kindness and non-violence towards yourself? You can do the same thing in daily life. You can take what you learn on the mat and you can bring it into daily life, and you can start to ask yourself these questions in daily life. And this is why yoga on the mat is a reflection of yoga, which is life. Am I moving through my day with kindness? Was that action that I did kind or unkind? And where did it come from? And how can I start to bring it back to kindness? How can I start to bring it back to compassion? And I sometimes think about this, like if I'm having a little bit of an argument, like in a relationship. I don't like arguing, but sometimes it happens, doesn't it? We're all human. But you can take a step back with a bit of awareness and think, how can I come at this with a little bit more compassion towards the other person? How can I come at this situation with a little bit more compassion towards myself? How can I work with ahimsa, non-violence, in this dispute? Instead of arguing, how can I take that higher self position and work with non-violence so that both parties have a nicer day? If anything, we're going to move through life with a little bit more joy and a little bit more compassion towards the world around us. So that is ahimsa in a nutshell. Come to the yoga mat with kindness. Come to life with kindness. Ask yourself the question daily, is this coming from a space of compassion? Or is this coming from a space of violence? And your answer is in the question. And then you can shift it. You can shift it. Once you become aware of something, you can shift it. Okay, guys, that is your little chat for today. If you like this little chat, please like it and maybe subscribe. And I'm going to try and do these daily, okay? And I'm going to get better at them. And you're going to see me in lots of different spaces, and it might even sometimes be against that broken washing machine that's flashing at me, and I can't fix it. So wherever it is, I'm going to rock up here and give you these little yoga tips, bits of philosophy, spirituality, how we can start to bring yoga off the mat, beyond the bends, and start to integrate it into daily life for a much more happy, healthy and wholesome way of living. Okay, lots of love. Mwah! Thank you for tuning in. Bye.